Guys hear my background noise here?
No, it's fine.
It's good. Here we go. They're being live streamed. All right, we are live streaming. So welcome everybody to another week of Zoom Sabbath School, where we are going through our Sabbath School material. We're in the Prophets and Kings, chapter 41, and want to just welcome everybody to our church service this morning. In case you didn't know, we are doing this weekly, so we always invite people to come in and join us via Zoom, YouTube, or maybe for those who are watching this later on, always welcome. So I want to thank our panelists this morning, Jake and Reen. Thank you for joining us. Jake is joining us all the way from sunny Hawaii. So thank you for waking up 2 hours early and doing that. And then Reen, thank you for joining us today as well. So for those of you who want to follow along, you can go to our chat. Just go to our chat room and you can look at the questions that we're posting. For those of you who have joined in Zoom, you can always pipe in and ask a question if you want to. If you are joining us via YouTube, of course, if you have access to texting, you please feel free to join us that way as well. So before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for being with us on this beautiful Sabbath day. For those who are near or far, we ask that you be with us. For those who are joining in now or later, we ask that they will receive a blessing from our discussion today on chapter 41, Prophets and Kings, a fiery furnace. Lord, a special lesson here for each and every one of us. Lord, I pray the Holy Spirit will be with us, inspire us, teach us, and send angels to watch over us, to protect us, to keep any of the enemies away. We ask these things in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. All right, so as we are going through this material, I want to just invite those of you to listen and to join us. And again, as we read this, if it seems interesting or intriguing to you, I encourage you to go back and read the chapter again with the extra insights that you received today. So let's dig right in. We are talking about the fiery furnace. And so this little recap for those of you who have not read it. It's a simple story. We've heard it ever since we were children. We heard it multiple times as we grew up, and we'll hear it one more time today. The story, of course, is following out the last 2 weeks, or 2 weeks ago, where Nebuchadnezzar had the dream. He had the statue was finally revealed to him in a dream. Daniel kind of comes to everybody's rescue, and he reveals the dream that God has given him and the interpretation that God has given him. Daniel never takes credit, and he talks about the plan that God had. The statue, from the different metals, from the head to the bronze to the silver, to the bronze, to iron and mixed clay. And so we hear that and see now in this chapter, we come into the situation where Nebuchadnezzar, who initially, obeys God in fear of God and just amazed how God can actually reveal dreams, is actually behaving himself. And then suddenly he turns a little bit, he goes back to idolatry, worshiping idolatry in full force. And then his council of astrologers and magicians, they jump on board and say, hey, how can we really maximize this, and try to tempt Nebuchadnezzar. We'll talk a little bit about that. And into making a statue of gold, of course, puts in a little bit more, kind of picks his pride a little bit. And all of a sudden, here we are in the land of Durham. There's a huge statue made purely from gold, and Nebuchadnezzar is asking, or actually demanding, that everybody comes to this field, into this plain, and worship this golden statue. All right. And then here we are with this presentation of three particular boys that we heard about, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel is not here in this particular moment. He's off perhaps doing another work. Perhaps Nebuchadnezzar knew of his convictions and to kind of send him away. We don't know, and it doesn't say, but he's not here. We see him again another time, tested in the lion's den. But today is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what will they do when forced to worship and bow down to this idol? That's kind of like where we start today's presentation, and we're going to dig right in. Okay, I think we've again heard the story before. So let's begin with the first question. I'm going to have Reen maybe take an answer to this question that's posted right there. What was the difference between God's statue that he gave in his dream for Nebuchadnezzar, one with all the different metals, and what was the difference between Nebuchadnezzar's statue, King Nebuchadnezzar, and kind of what did it represent, and kind of applying to our own personal lives? Reen, can you give us some insight into this question?
Well, yeah. So one statue was, as you said, the gold, and then the silver, and then so all these kingdoms will kind of fall, and Nebuchadnezzar said, well, I'll just do a whole, everything out of gold. And I think his pride and his I guess selfishness, it was too strong to let go of, and so no matter how powerful man is still only man, and God's kingdom will break into pieces and consume all the other kingdoms. No matter what, man will always fail in the end.
That's right. And the question that one of the questions I have is, how do you think it would? Well, first of all, let me ask you this. What would come in at the end? Remember, and again, I know that you went there probably 2 weeks ago, but we know the story of the metals and the statue, and then there was a rock that was carved without hands, and then it hits this idol, and it kind of pulverizes it, and then it grows up into a huge mountain. And I think for the sake of this argument, that wasn't in this chapter, but it represents, God's kingdom, right? That God's kingdom would reign supreme, and then it would, topple over this whole idol. I think from that standpoint, it represents that, God's kingdom ultimately will rise and destroy all these other kingdoms. But Nebuchadnezzar kind of thought otherwise. He goes, I'm not going to follow along with God's plan. I'm gonna, the chapter talks about, him wanting to have the whole golden statue from head to toe. What do you think that kind of represents?
Just his ego, I can just do it myself. I don't need God. It's simple enough. I've got all my people around me that advise me and say yes to me, and I feel like if God can do it, why can't I do it? I can do it.
Right, that's right. And I think we realize it was his pride, right, that was ultimately, triggered or hampered by his board. Jake, what do you think?
Well, I didn't realize some of the aspects until I was reading the Prophets and Kings last night. It said that it was actually his advisors that used this Daniel's kind of vision to making the whole head gold. He said that it was. I was always under the impression that it was Nebuchadnezzar who personally wanted to make it all gold head to toe, but it said that it says right here. Basically, they used his Nebuchadnezzar's own pride as a bait to basically set up the whole thing. It's kind of like, I think they're like, oh yeah, if you do this, he's gonna like totally go for it, and then it'd be great, and we can make this huge idol. It's kind of like conspiring to lure the king to do this, So I think ultimately it was Nebuchadnezzar, his own pride that wanted to do this, but it was I think we just think about the people that's around us that's giving us some advice that could guide us which direction we go in life.
That's right. That's right. In fact, that has a great segue into the second question. So ultimately at the end, we know that God, has, it's incredible that He gives us the future, right? And through that one story, and we know through historical books, sorry, that all the kingdoms come exactly as foretold, which is awesome because it's prophetic, it's prophecy. And if God can tell what's going to happen in the future and says this is what's going to happen, I mean, it's pretty powerful that we can trust God in all things, right? That this is what's going to happen at the very end. If all these kingdoms happen at the very end, His kingdom will reign supreme. We know that at the end, God will come back and establish His kingdom. So let's go to question number 2. It says here, let me see if I can type it up, and then Nebuchadnezzar was encouraged to pass a law to worship the golden idol. How is it similar to the end times when the laws will be passed by people who hate God's people? Let's just see here. So let's see. So maybe I can do that. So
I think this is my question.
yeah, why don't you go ahead and I'm going to type this up and then type it into the questions here. Oh, okay. Go ahead. I think Pastor did already. Go ahead and Jay, can you answer that question if you could?
I think there are many examples in the history of like higher governments or own governments or own leaders using what the current climate is to mandate laws that affects our personal lives directly. I think the most recent example is, COVID was such a devastating thing. And then, I think mandating vaccine, I think whether it's justified or not is their own personal opinion. But I think just stepping back and looking at the whole policy implemented, people could lose their jobs and livelihood, what to decide which direction they want to go. I believe, I personally believe the vaccine was good, but whether it was the government could make us, have the vaccine to maintain our job, I think that is not right. Ultimately, we're losing our freedom. Even going back to World War II, just there's some, bizarre cases where leaders thought up, policies or laws to hurt, minorities or individuals. I feel like in the US, we have a lot of liberty and freedom to do what we want. It's just the fact that, we had these, I'm not going to talk about China and some other countries where, it is a lot more oppressive, but I consider US to be pretty free, and we could have these kind of policies and laws that could affect us. I think Nebuchadnezzar, after he saw, after the fiery furnace, I think he made a decree. Basically, you have to worship Daniel's God, or he's a true God. Which I think he might have done it initially in a good intention, because that's what his belief was. He was convinced, but I do not think that's right. Because we could have any leader, with whether it be Catholics or Jews or Muslim, if they may implement what their beliefs on us, we don't have the freedom of religion. And ultimately, that's not what God wants. God wants us to have freedom, and we choose to have our faith instead of whether being forced upon us or not.
That's right. Reen, any thoughts on that question? Or what Reen said?
So, yeah, like what Jake said about the about the mandates and everything. I think, what if the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, worked perfectly, like, what they originally advertised? I think it would be much harder if you didn't want to get it, for whatever reason, can you imagine how many people would be like vilifying someone for that? Because now we know that it doesn't work as well, and people can justify, okay, but maybe I shouldn't have got it, or but if it did work the way they advertised it, and you still didn't want to get it for whatever reason, it doesn't matter what the reason is, there would be so many people looking at you as an enemy, right? And so if this was for religion, if they said, okay, this is the correct religion and here's all the reasons why they're all correct, then it would be very easy for most people to look at other people like us who don't believe in the Sunday law or whatever that's coming up, to view them as outsiders, and they shouldn't be allowed to do anything. You know what I mean? So with the vaccine, you can do tests and stuff and studies and show what works and doesn't work, but with a religion, how can you test that? It's a belief, and if they can convince you that it's correct, then it's much harder. It'll be much harder for us to go against that. And that's why I think having faith is so important, and having people around you, not like Nebuchadnezzar, just yes men, having people around you that will correct you if they think you're wrong, and help you go closer to God. I think it's important, because it will probably be like that at one point.
You're absolutely right. I know that we're going to go through the great controversy as part of our reviews for Sabbath school in the coming months. That's going to be towards the end. But there's a lot of information that's going to come about at the end of our time. And I kind of referenced it a little bit with this question, and Jake, you mentioned it, and Reen, you kind of mentioned it as well. And I'd like to kind of come back to that maybe at the end of our discussion to kind of show you maybe, hey, is that really going to happen? How could that happen? But I want to kind of get through these questions to kind of present a kind of a basics of understanding of what, the story that we can learn from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then kind of apply it to our kind of more current events, which kind of goes into the next question, number 3. If someone can, Pastor can print that up. The question was, what was so bad about bowing down to an object or an idol? How would that be dishonoring God? Is there any similarities in our modern days? So let's answer that question. So the question really is, is what was such a bad thing, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were the only ones standing up in the entire plain. All the other people from all the different nations were told to come and worship, right? This is the first time that something huge like this has ever been built, something that, King Nebuchadnezzar had, encouraged everybody to come and join and shine. And then as soon as the music was going to start, then everybody would bow down and bow down to this idol. And it was very clear to everyone there that that bowing down to this object was a form of worship. Andrew White said it was very clear to everybody that they were there to worship, right? And if you look at the people who were invited, there was a lot of people taken captive from Jerusalem, right? And Judah. When Nebuchadnezzar came, he took a lot of captives, a lot of hostages, left only a few people there back home, but he brought them all. And so all the other people around the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were also other Jews, right? And they were also told, you bow down or else you will be placed in that hot fire furnace. And it was right there, everybody could see. Now, you could either say, well, I'm not going to bow down like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or you could say, well, I'm just going to pretend to bow down, and then put your head down and just say, okay, God, I'm worshiping you, but I'm just going to do this so that I don't get my head chopped off or be thrown into this fire furnace. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, no, I'm not going to do that, because I'm not going to, again, bowing down to any other idol was actually strictly prohibited in the Jewish religion, right? Bowing down to idols was like bowing down to another idol. And God had told through Moses and through so many different of their leaders in the past, you will not do that. If you do, then I cannot bless you, right? So the fact that they would bow down, if they bow down, that's kind of like their, their mental, if their mental worship, if it's kind of their decision to bow down to another god. Acting like this, I think, is kind of like, what they say, the mark of the beast is on your hand, right? Is first, it's on your mind, right? Because you're acting to do it, and then you're thinking to worship. So God asks that you kind of, give him your heart and soul to both. It says here, sorry. And Andrew White says this, but God decreed otherwise. Not all had bowed down to the knee, to the idolatrous symbol of the human power. And that's when these were here. Let's see. Pointing to the fiery furnace, he reminded them of the punishment awaiting them. Okay, that was Nebuchadnezzar. So, in our days, we could be asking people to, worship, or God, we can worship, or we'll be forced to worship, right? I think the question is, are we going to be asked to worship idols in our future? Well, there may not be a statue, in downtown Bellevue, where we'll have to all go down there with our families and bow down to it, right? But what other, idol is there? What other object that is going to come up in the future? And in Revelation chapter 14, it says there's an image to the beast, right? And all shall be worshiping it. And I think later on we're going to be finding out what this is alluding to. I think this is a very perfect story of how in the future there is going to be a combination of church and state, right? Because Nebuchadnezzar was a power figure, he was political, but he was now enforcing a religious dictate or religious law. And so now you combine religious, church and state, right? Power that's going to enforce a type of worship and make everybody bow down. Very interesting. That's how the same thing happened with Daniel, right? In the lion's den, there's a political figure. They made a law that you can only worship and bow down to the king, right? And then if you didn't, you'd be thrown into a lion's den. So very similar, church and state get together, passing a law to enforce a form of worship, right? And then you'll be tested. And that's what this is all about. Okay, let's go to the fourth question. So the fourth question is this. The statement that God can deliver us, remember the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they responded to the king because the king saw that they were not worshiping, they were not bowing down. And he threatened them. He said, you will worship, I'll give you one more chance, or else now, the furnace is now 7 times hotter. You can be thrown into that thing. He gave him one more chance and he says, do it. But then there was a response. And I think, Reen, why don't you go ahead and tell me about this topic, because this is an interesting. In fact, if you want me to, Reen, would you like me to read the quote, or do you have the quote?
Well, no, go ahead.
Okay, so this is what they said, and then Reen, I'd like you to respond to this. What does it mean to you, right? And Nebuchadnezzar says in his rage, and he tells them to raise the temperature furnace 7 times harder, and he points a finger at those 3 guys and says, and this is what he says: who is that God that should deliver you out of my hands? I mean, look how proud he got. All of a sudden, before he was in fear of God, after Daniel told him about his dream, right, and respected God, but now here he is. Since he was so upset, he says, who is this God that should deliver you? I mean, he's like pointing to God, right? He was like, defying God. And this is the men's answer. O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Meaning that, hey, we don't care how we answer you this. If it be so, if this is your decision, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Their faith strengthened as they declared that God would be glorified by delivering them. And then triumphant assurance born of implicit trust in God, they added, this is Ellen G. White saying, but if not, meaning if God doesn't save them, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Wow. Tell me about that. What you thought about that statement, man?
Yeah, so King Nebuchadnezzar was, as you said, he was trying to puff up his feathers, or trying to be as scary as possible, as saying that to make the furnace 7 times hotter, which is it's not really possible. But if you're in that situation, those 3 kids, you're not thinking like, oh, he can't really do that. They're probably just scared. Or he would think that they would just be scared. So he's saying, oh, it's going to be 7 times hotter, and doing everything he can to convince them that that's the only thing to do, is to do what I say. And I think when they said, even if God doesn't protect us or doesn't deliver us from this, we still won't worship you. That was like, them very humbly pointing it back at him, right? At the king. And that is all from their relationship with God. I think last time we were doing this from a couple weeks ago, it's about how they were raised, and how every aspect of their life reflected God. We know that they were supposed to eat meat and all the king's food, and even that they wouldn't budge. And very kindly they asked to, let us eat what we want to eat, and we will prove to you, that we will still be strong and be good soldiers. And no matter what was brought to them, their faith was never shaken. And they were young people, and so young people are very impressionable, and to have that kind of faith is, it's amazing. And I think it goes down to just every single aspect of your life. If you can try and do what you think is best according to God's will help you have that faith.
Jake, any thoughts about this question for you?
Yeah, I think just riding along what Reen said, maybe, Reen mentioned there was a kids, but I didn't really think about that like that. But yeah, they're probably, I would think maybe in their early 20s. So they're basically kids. But yeah, in some ways they're more brave than us, they had their faith and they held on to it. I feel like when you're older, if I had kids in that situation, I'd be like, well, I'll try to justify myself. But like if I just, like bow to the Lord, but like I'm not really doing it in my heart, God will understand, But yeah, it's maybe in some ways that the younger you are, you can be more sincere with your faith. And as you get older, we'll find justification to, like for example, we have different tolerance for what we could do on Sabbath. Some people, say, well, I could just do this. We're on vacation, so God will forgive you. So, like, yeah, we should use Meshach, the three of them as an example, and try to align our faith that way. So,
yeah, I think that the young, we have to train our young people, right? All of us, we have, what if Jeremy, and Jake, your son, and my son, and all of a sudden, as they grow older, wouldn't it be awesome to know that their spiritual conviction is as strong as these three, right? What if, it'd be my dream so that we can raise our children so that one day, maybe like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're going to be up in front of who knows where, and their convictions will be tested. And to the point of, you go, do we say as our children, hey, keep the Sabbath and, stay true and don't steal, don't do this, keep all the commandments. But if someone ever points a gun at you, spit on the Bible, stamp on the, on the Bible, deny God, because I want you to come back and we want you still alive, right? I want you to, don't put your life at risk. What if, we hear later on that Shadrach, and let's say that all three of our kids are somewhere at a concert or something, and they're doing something terrible, and somebody just say, hey, they point a gun and says, you will deny God or else I'm going to kill all three of you. What if they say, hey, we're not going to do all that? And then all of a sudden they come home and tell us an incredible story of how brave they were. We're like, what? You almost died? But at the same time, you're like, wow. Our kids, we as children, our parents did something right to raise these children, just like their parents, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's, parents taught them and Daniel, right? So that when they were just like 12, right, being taken hostage, they had that kind of conviction to stand this brave, even to the point of losing their life, right? And you know what I mean? I don't know if you don't have a furnace at home, right? Like
No.
one of the,
No.
but I went to Matthew Choi's house, and he has a stove that those the wood irons stove, cast iron things, and he says this. He says, Joe, if certain wood burns hotter than others, right? Certain type of wood, and then if you open up the vent and you push in air through it, you can get it really hot, over 500 degrees Celsius, right? And he says it got so hot one day when he put in some of this special wood and they opened the vent that this whole thing was going like this, and the whole thing was radiating, and he got scared that the thing was going to blow up. So he had to quickly put some like cooling things on his furnace, do all these things just so that it could calm down because it was radiating so much heat. So I'm like, oh, and it's true. When you put certain kind of fuel and you put enough oxygen in, and I'm sure some of those guys are pumping air, putting the right kind of fuel to make this furnace 7 times hotter. So hot that the soldiers who were putting them in, throwing them in, it was so hot, it says that it killed the soldiers by purely being in front of them, right? But as we know, when they threw them in, here's the next segue. He says, who was, the king saw, them going in, and all the ropes were, burnt off, and they were walking around without a hair being burnt, and there was a fourth person. And then Nebuchadnezzar looks in and he says, who is that man? And that's question number 5. Who was the fourth person in the furnace? What is that? How is that important to us? And what was King Nebuchadnezzar's response? I know that was another question for someone else, but what do you think, Jake and Rin? Do you have maybe a thought about that before I answer some questions? Who do we know who that was?
Jesus. Or angel? Was it angel or Jesus?
Yeah, it was Christ. It was
Okay.
Christ who was walking with them. It was right. In fact, it says this. In the alarm, the king turned to his lords, asked them, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. Even he claims that. The Son of God. And Jake, you're right. It is Jesus, right? How in the world does Nebuchadnezzar, a pagan, king from Babylon, how can he exclaim, which we know to be true, that this looks like the Son of God? How in the world could he have said that? Why did he say that? Right? I was like, I mean, Ellen G. White does tell us in the scripture, and I'll read this up because this was my question. And this is what was amazing for this. This is a take-home message. and this is, I'll just read Ellen G. White says, it was right for the king to make a public confession. Okay. Let me see. Okay. No. Okay, here it is. How did the heathen king know what the Son of God was like? Right? He's a king, right? But we have to understand, he had how many years of exposure to Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Listen to this. The Hebrew captives filling the positions of trust in Babylon had in life and character represented before him the truth, before Nebuchadnezzar, right? When asked for a reason of their faith, they had given it without hesitation. Plainly and simply, they had presented the principles of righteousness, thus teaching those around them of the God whom they worshipped. They had told of Christ, the Redeemer to come, and in the form of the fourth in the midst of the fire, the king recognized the Son of God. Wow. You know, if our children, if our children grow up and they live a certain life that resembles Christ's life, right? In the things that they say, the things that they do, one day when they go around people recognize, hey, who is living in that guy? You know, who do they represent? And it's the same thing for us, right? As parents, how do we live our lives so that our children can see something, they can see Christ in our behavior, right? I mean, fathers, we have a certain role in our home, right? To be the priest of the household. Can we teach our children that, you know, Christ lives in us? And then they can walk that way when they grow up. And then when they go to a pagan heathen land or a public place, all of a sudden they could, by their actions, their behaviors, their personalities, and by what they speak and how they share, they can talk of and share of the person that, you know, rules our heart, which is Christ. And then people can see that. That's what Nebuchadnezzar did. Nebuchadnezzar knew the story of God because he had taken them captives. He knows, I'm sure he scopes out the land before he does that. He had Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He knew that they were special. Just so that, and then Daniel came to the rescue, right? Told the dreams, and he became one of his confidants. And then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had special privileges, right, to lead. And so Nebuchadnezzar knew everything that they knew. He just had forgotten. So that was amazing. So that was a take-home question. The point. All right. Question number 6. Jake, I'm going to ask you to do this one. All right. So let me do the question number 6 is this. Okay. Copy and paste. Okay, here we go. Question number 6. After witnessing the miracle, Nebuchadnezzar issued a decree that everyone should worship Daniel's God. He was really excited and impressed, right? Obviously. Why was that not necessarily good news? Can there be a concern like that in our days in forcing people to worship God as opposed to, you know, people worshiping, you know, not worshiping God? Would God approve, you think? Does God compel a confession of faith? It's kind of a lot of questions in one. You can just kind of answer all of them together if you like, Jake.
Yeah, I do not believe that's what God wants. He wants us to choose our own faith and not be forced upon it. I think there's examples around the world where governments or big entities try to force their beliefs onto the citizen, and the outcome is not it's not suitable. I think if you choose to do something we want, we love it, but especially the government's forcing us to do it, then I think it's more likely that people will go the other direction. And ultimately, God wants us to choose to love Him. And like I said, the higher powers may be constantly changing. Whoever's in power at the time may favor something different. So, yeah. And then I think it's happening all around us. I think I don't know, even local governments, or Jay Inslee wants to have, because he ultimately wanted to have this vaccine requirement mandated statewide, but of course he doesn't have that. He only has influence over just local, Washington State employees. So he did this whole, initial vaccine requirement, and they lost a lot of people. So what they're trying to do is, with the current booster, I think there's like 15% people are using it, because I think people realize, vaccine might have worked for some people, it didn't do anything. So they want people to get the booster. So instead of mandating and risk people losing, people quitting, he's trying to, this is starting January. They're actually talking about it. I don't know why it's not more in the news. They want to have $1,000 bonus. So if you get the booster shot, and if you're a state employee, then you receive the $1,000 bonus right away. And if you choose not to get the booster, then, and I just think this is like beyond silly that they would, dangle $1,000. And for some people, the $1,000 could go a long way. It could pay for gas, could buy food at the grocery, use that as to enforce what they believe is right, on individuals. I think it's wrong. And this could go in a different scales over time. I think it will happen. People talk, we know it from Ellen G. White writings. It could be a decree, or it could just be a thing as just, when you travel to Europe, when you go to like Austria, everything is closed on Sunday because it's a holy day, it's a day of rest. And I foresee that, I think Joe talked about this many years ago, that our morality, there's going to be some collapse in our in society, and then governments can be like, well, let's have a day like Sunday as an example, as a family day or something. They're going to label it something great, where everything will have to close business. It's going to be quoted as something, to bring family together. We have decline of morality, so that kind of thing. So I think what was the other question? Hold on a second. Number 6. Yes, does God compel a confession of faith? No, God does not want us to be forced into making a decision like that.
That's right.
Yeah, and then I think there definitely will be some kind of forcing. Yeah, depending who is on power. I think I was really into watching the midterm elections. I think depending which way it's swayed, there are people that are using like Christian nationalism as an excuse. So depending who's in power, I think I could see that happening.
Yeah. Reen, any thoughts on that question? Otherwise, I'm going to ask you the second question, question number 7. But in fact, let me kind of read what Ellen G. White said on this one. It was right for the king to make a public confession, and that's kind of like what it was, right? Because can you imagine? Thousands, if not millions of people were out on that plane, and they're all bowed down except for these 3 guys, right? And can you imagine, King Nebuchadnezzar could be quite upset and could instantly kill them, right? But obviously he knew who was protecting those 3 guys. It was God, and it was the Son of God walking with them. And to come out of that furnace untouched, wow, you can't touch these people now, right? There's no way that Nebuchadnezzar was going to touch them now, right? And so he kind of in confession, he says, okay, all right, I was wrong. No one can worship this idol, but everyone now has to worship God. And if you don't worship these guys God, then you're going to get killed. So he kind of reverts it back and says, you better worship God now, or else you're going to be killed, right? But to seek to exalt, and he was seeking to exalt the God of heaven above all other gods. But in endeavoring to force his subjects to make a similar confession of faith and to show similar reverence, Nebuchadnezzar was exceeding his right as a temporal sovereign, meaning as a worldly god, a king. He had no right, neither civil or moral, to threaten men with death for not worshiping God. Interesting. God then he had to make the decree consigning to the flames all those who refuse to worship the golden image. God, listen to this, God never compels the obedience of man. He leaves all free to choose whom they serve. That is a take-home message, I believe, too, right? So that, you know, God could enforce everybody to worship him, but he would have done that in heaven with Lucifer before he fell. But he gave every created being free choice. And that's what, you know, we are given, free choice to either worship God or to not worship God. But you're right, Jake, there is going to come a time that just like Nebuchadnezzar did, they are going to combine, you know, church and state, and they're going to enforce a law to make the people worship a certain way. Right now, this was like worshiping an idol, right? But in the future, what is that idol going to be? And what enforcement is that going to be? And we'll probably get that in the last question. Question number 7 is this. What important, and Rena, if you want to take a turn at this one, what important lesson can we learn from what we just learned here? And again, this was actually, I want to just briefly only talk about this question because I want to talk more about the last question. Will God protect his people who put trust in him?
Yes. In the end, you know, they went into the fire. They didn't, you know, say right when they're about to go and say, oh, okay, we were just joking. They actually went in there and they were going to die, but you know, they went through it anyways, and God was always there. And so yes, he will always protect us in the end. And yeah, like you and Jake said, yeah, if it was reversed, if we had a national Saturday law where everyone has to be SDA, would that be good? I don't think so, because that would also be force, and love is not force. Otherwise, he could just make everybody believe in him, and we'd just be all robots, and there would be no love in that. He would just control everything we do and the way we think. You know, that what's the point of that?
Sure.
So, yeah, I think giving us the freedom to choose and convincing other people really what the right choice is and why we should follow God and why we should be strong in our faith is important. Not just what we do, but why we do it. Yeah.
Jake, any thoughts? Do you think that God will protect those who stand by God?
Yes, ultimately we will be saved, but there will be martyrs, and
That's true.
You know, yes, we will be saved at the end. Depending how we get there, it will be different. I think we just have to know that and believe in that. You know, there might be miracles that we may see immediately, and there might not be. Maybe John the Baptist is a good example. You know, he was tormented. He was jailed for many years, but at the end, he still believed, and I believe that we'll meet him in heaven. So.
Yeah, if we can make that one statement, you know, we know that God can and will, you know, protect us. But that's a but. But if he chooses not to, you know, for whatever reason that only God knows, right? For what would be to, what would be ultimately for good. And obviously, like I said, if we make that kind of stand, we'll be in heaven anyhow, just like John the Baptist or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says here, by the deliverance of his faithful servants, the Lord declared that he takes his stand with the oppressed and rebukes all earthly powers that rebel against the authority of heaven. The 3 Hebrews declared to the whole nation of Babylon their faith in him who they worshipped. They relied on God. And in the hour of that trial, they remembered the promise. And this is the promise that, they heard. And this is from Isaiah and a prophet that they remembered, because, they remember these talks. And this is what Isaiah 43:2 says, quote, "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. And when thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flames kindle upon thee." Isaiah 43:2. And in a marvelous manner, their faith in the living word had been honored in the sight of everyone. The tidings of their wonderful deliverance was carried to many countries by the representatives of the different nations that had been invited to Nebuchadnezzar to the dedication. Through the faithfulness of his children, God was glorified in all the earth. So in that particular time, there was a reason for God to, to protect them, right? And to keep that promise. I mean, Isaiah said that, right? Can you imagine? You think that the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego says, yeah, if we stand here, God can protect us. But if he chooses not to, then we still won't. I mean, that's faithfulness. And so I think that whether it's rivers or waters or flames, God can to deliver us, right? Especially if he can be glorified. So I think that's the statement that we can do. God, do whatever your will is, whatever it can be to glorify your name. I want to make sure that. I mean, if we can have that kind of conviction, wow. Let's go to the last question. We got 10 minutes more, and I wanted to spend more time on this one. Okay, it's a very topic, and I think Jake, you kind of referenced this a lot, and then and Reen, you did as well, right? And I want to kind of wrap things up and then kind of come to a conclusion, because this can take another 2 hours just to kind of even touch the peak of this question. How do you think the Sabbath will be used to trap God's people to enforce a form of worship? How can we prepare for these events? Because let me tell you this, and this was my question, and I'll take them time to do this, and then I'd like your inputs. If you look back now, let's kind of come a summary, recap. We have a story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, who was raised in a certain way by their parents in the belief and to trust in God and be faithful in all things and to keep the commandments of God holy, right? They had these 10 commandments from times past, right? We know that these commandments were even in heaven. They were given to Moses and given to Mount Sinai, to all these people. And the most important one in this particular situation was, in their event was, thou shalt not bow to other gods. But there are other 10, the 9 commandments. They stand tested, and they stood, on solid ground, believing that God will protect them. If he does, great. If not, they still won't, even protect their own lives. They will give up their lives to give God glory. And that's exactly what happened. Fast forward in time, is there going to be a time? Yes, we knew that happened with Daniel, right? Even he got tested. But is there going to become a time when we, in our current day, will we be tested when there's going to be a church and state getting together, pass a law that will create, again, there may not be an idol that we worship, but can there be an idol that, or something like that, a commandment that will be compromised? And I believe that's going to be the Sabbath issue. And Jake, I think you referenced that, and so did you, Reen. I also agree with you. I believe that Sabbath is going to be the issue where our tests will finally come to a head. Jeannie kind of mentioned, thank you, Jeannie, for listening. She said so many martyrs died, right? And they did it for a reason, and they did it. And if that death and their blood that was shed for them, whether, in the arena or on the cross or wherever, if it could spread a seed to so many other people, that would be even great too, right? That God would be able to come in more. So I do believe, and if I were to go ahead and again, just to kind of talk a little bit about this, in the great controversy on, I think it was chapter 23, let me see. I'll just tell you for sure. For those of you who are interested in listening to this, chapter 25, the God's law immutable, meaning unchangeable. It talks a little bit about why, if God had, the fifth commandment, fourth commandment was the one on what? The Sabbath, right? Keep the Sabbath holy. And in that commandment, it talks about God being our creator. And they said that if the Israelites kept the Sabbath holy and kept it true, they would know that God is the creator, that we are the created beings. And so we would not follow after other idols. That would be true. If we knew who our God was, as he's our creator, and we were created beings, we would not compromise, bowing down to any idols, right? And if we keep this Sabbath day holy, it will come with tests. It says here, and Ellen G. White says this: the importance of the Sabbath as a memorial of creation is that it keeps ever present the true reason why worship is due to God. Because he is a creator and we are his creatures. The Sabbath, therefore, lies at the very foundation of divine worship, where it teaches this great truth in the most impressive manner, she says. And no other institution does this. The true ground of divine worship, not of that on the seventh day merely, but of all worship, is found in the distinction between the creator and his creatures. This great fact can never become obsolete and must never be forgotten. That's actually a quote from J. N. Andrews, from the History of Sabbath, chapter 27. And listen to this. It was to keep this truth ever before the minds of men that God instituted the Sabbath in Eden. And so long as the fact that he is our creator continues to be the reason why we should worship him, so long the Sabbath will continue as its sign and memorial. Had the Sabbath been universally kept, man's thoughts and affections would have been led to the creator as an object of reverence and worship. And there would never have been an idolater, an atheist, or an infidel. The keeping of the Sabbath is a sign of loyalty to the true God, him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of earth. It follows that the message which commands men to worship God and keep his commandments will especially call upon them to keep the fourth commandment. And Satan knows that, right? Satan knows that that is the reason why he's going to attack the Sabbath day one day, because it is going to be a point of attack. I think we all agree and we all know that, right? And it's going to be combined forces with the whole world, the Protestant world, the Catholic world, the spiritual world, the spiritualism. Atheists and Catholic Christians alike will be joined in forces to enforce a particular day. And we know that it's going to be the Sabbath day. And just out of curiosity, if anybody wants to know, yes, we know that they have emphasized Sunday as going to be the day of worship. And Jake, you kind of mentioned that it's going to be a slow progression of Sunday is going to be the day of worship, or a day of rest for green, keep everything green for whatever reasons. And then it's going to be a day of rest for kind of, family day. Then it's going to be a day for, hey, let's have a prayer day. And then eventually it's going to be a day we have to worship day. And it's going to be a progression. But I'll tell you how, for those of you who are interested, Google on your phone today and say, what day is the seventh day? If you want to do that, do you know what will pop up?
Saturday. No?
Do it today.
Okay.
Jake, you want to do it real quickly before we hang up? Says,
Well, what is the seventh day?
yeah, what day is the seventh day of the week? Okay. What does it say?
Google says Sunday.
Right now.
Say that again one more time.
Google says Sunday.
We have a movement we're going to eventually be seen as Sunday as the seventh day. And calendars have already been changed. It is if you look at that, it's an international change. I won't go into more detail today because it is something that needs more time and emphasis. And I'm going to wrap up here in 2 minutes here. Would like us to, because we will definitely get to that part, I hope, but I hope that people can read chapter 25, Great Controversy. I wish that you can go back and read this chapter 41 of the fiery furnace and see the resolve and the faithfulness of these children. So when the time comes in the future, when our Sabbath is going to be attacked, because remember, Satan knows it's going to be a worship day. It's going to be an allegiance day. Who do you worship? And if you worship on the Sabbath day, the way that we know to worship on the Sabbath day. But remember, even the day is going to be changed. It boggles my mind how that will happen. But again, it's not for today's discussion. But I want to go ahead and conclude with this. I want, no matter what happens in the future, I want us to be able to have the resolve. Today's lesson was to have this kind of resolve of the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I want us to have that resolve, and I want the children to have that kind of resolve. And let's listen to this conclusion, and I will end with this. Okay? Thank you, gentlemen, for this. Here's a conclusion. As in the days of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, so in the closing period of Earth's history, the Lord will work mighty in the behalf of those who stand steadfast for the right. He who walked with the Hebrew worthies in the fire furnace will be with his followers wherever they are. His abiding presence will comfort and sustain. In the midst of the time of trouble, trouble such as never been since there was a nation, his chosen ones will stand unmoved. Satan, with all the host of evil, cannot destroy the weakest of God's saints. Angels that excel in the strength will protect them, and on their behalf, Jehovah will reveal himself as a God of gods, and to be able to save to the utmost, you have put trust in him. The season of distress before God's people will call for a faith that will not falter. His children must take and manifest that he is the only object of the worship, and no other, and that no consideration, not even that of life itself, can induce them to make the least concession to false worship. To the loyal hearts of the commands of sinful, finite men will sink into the insignificance beside the word of the eternal God. Truth will be obeyed through the result, be imprisoned, though the result be imprisonment, death, or exile. I pray that would be our resolve, right? I hope we can remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and know that what happened back then will happen in the future. We know that. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, be with us today. Thank you for the lesson of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, and the resolve, even as young men. And I know that the resolve was trained and learned and was taught by parents. So Lord, I pray that parents will teach your children that. I pray that we will live that ourselves so that when we as a family can be tested in the future, we'll stand strong, but to know that you will protect us. But if not, Lord, we know that we will never bow down. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Everyone, join us for Sabbath School at 11:15. Thank you, Jake and Reen, for joining us for this Sabbath School Zoom. And we'll meet everybody at church. Enjoy and happy Sabbath. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.